Hi guys, and welcome back to the High Man podcast. It is episode 20, not 21.
Yeah, that's right.
Today it is the Wednesday, the 21st of December 2022, getting closer to Christmas. As you can tell, we're back in person, both home for the Christmas break, so it's good to be back together.
Should get a few in-person episodes in with some high production quality. So today's the first time we've done multiple cameras, so hopefully it all works smoothly. Maybe it won't be multiple cameras, maybe only one of them will work, but hopefully it's alright.
We've got 3 cameras set up. We hope that we can get some different angles, make it a bit more interesting for viewers. Obviously the listeners will still have the same pleasure as always. But right, so today's episode we're gonna dive into discovering the shadow and like embracing the shadow. It's a topic that was discovered by Carl Jung, so we're going to cover that today and then go through different points, what it is, how to integrate it, why it's important, why it can be dangerous maybe, and maybe some examples of like what we've seen in the media and on TV shows and movies.
Yeah, sounds good.
But yeah, so that's basically the episode for today, so I hope you guys enjoy. We'll get stuck right in. So I think I'd like to start with a quote from Carl Jung himself. He says, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. The latter procedure, however, is disagreeable and therefore not popular." It's quite an interesting quote. It will kind of become a bit more apparent what it sort of means as we go through the episode, because you'll kind of understand what the shadow is if you don't already. But a bit on Carl Jung, just as a person. So, he's a Swiss psychologist. Born in 1875, died in 1961, so he lived through both wars. I think that definitely influenced him a little bit, because seeing how, especially like the Nazis and like Hitler, and like how people kind of reacted to that and possibly didn't integrate the shadow in a healthy way. Definitely made him realise certain things about like the human psyche and stuff. But he was very influential and influenced by Sigmund Freud, who's another huge psychologist in that field. Both men I don't know too much about, but I know they're very much cited by a lot of people today because of the foundational work they've done for modern psychology. More so about him, he's just apparently he developed the concepts of extroverted and introverted.
Oh really?
Which I never knew.
Yeah, I didn't know that either.
And then also archetypes and the collective unconscious.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard about the collective unconscious, but not understood what it really means. I can kind of give a guess, but I've not actually dived into what that means. It seems like a good idea. Not a good idea, but because obviously it can be probably a bad thing that comes from different things, but
yeah,
you know what I mean. But yes, so moving on. So what is the shadow? That's what we're going to get into. First of all, there's different names from what I've understood. There's like the alter ego, the lower self, the dark twin or brother, and like a lot more. But what exactly is it? Jung kind of described it as the part of ourselves that is pushed down into the unconscious psyche. It's a collection of our repressed emotions and aspects of our identity. So as everyone lives their lives, we all present this persona, like different parts and aspects of our character are presented to other people, so we're perceived in a certain way, and that's like sort of what our persona is. Everyone's got an idea of like how they want to be seen in the world. Some people want to be seen as like a tough, rugged person who like doesn't take any shit, and then other people obviously want to be kind and loving and like very agreeable.
Mm-hmm.
But underneath each of those very different people is this shadow self, and that definitely is a part that I believe it now everybody has.
Yeah.
Would you say that you believe everybody has?
Yeah, so the way you explained it there with the persona, Carl Jung also called that the ego, which is basically the self that we present to the world. That's what we want other people to think of ourselves as. Yeah. But in some fundamental way, we have different desires, different character traits, some of which are the type of things we want to show other people, but inevitably some of them are things that we might associate with them being embarrassing or socially unacceptable or even evil. And those parts of ourselves, we can't just deny their existence when when they do exist. So what happens is they don't just disappear, but that they are kind of bottled up inside and suppressed, and that's what creates the shadow.
Yeah. I think you summed it up nicely. It's when I first came onto this topic, it kind of felt weird, assuming that everybody almost has this evil part of themselves. And when you talk about the shadow, do you think the shadow sort of has to be formed by these negative traits? From what I've said, seen, it's kind of aggression and dominance and assertiveness and disagreeableness. They kind of form the shadow. You don't really hear about the shadow having, I don't know, empathy and stuff like that. Why do you think it is almost on the face value negative traits that form it? Although they can be.
Yeah, well, I think on the surface that's what it seems like. I think Carl Jung said that the two traits which were most kind of suppressed in people was their aggression and their sexual desire. Those were the two things that stood out the most. And I guess in a way those two things are the most common because they can be very destructive if they're let to kind of reign free, and they are things that we're told since we're young to kind of feel, I guess, shame about or to kind of suppress. But I do think I don't think it's necessarily right to classify them as good and bad, because I think there certainly are good traits we'll get into more of the benefits of integrating the shadow, but I think you can uncover good traits which you've previously suppressed. For example, with aggression, if you've completely classified aggression as a negative thing, then you'll never, part of aggression and part of assertiveness is being able to have confidence in yourself and to stand up when there's injustice and have confidence in doing that. So those are obviously positive things, but you need to integrate the so-called the negative trait in order to actually manifest that. And I think there are some other positive traits, and it's certainly something people should try and do to integrate a shadow. But yeah, I definitely don't think it's all negative.
No, yeah, I guess it depends on the way they're used. Because we could even flip it the other way around and say someone could use empathy in a negative way. We talked about with social justice warriors. They call themselves these warriors for social justice and have all these positive outlooks on why the world should be the way they think, but they realistically use these happy-go feelings to manipulate the world and trying to assert their own dominance. Yeah. So I guess it can flip.
That could certainly that would certainly be an example of the shadow, because their persona that they're presenting are these people who are completely kind and loving, whereas in reality they have resentment and hatred built up inside of them, which clearly comes out in those type of very I mean, not saying all people that stand for social justice are bad, but the social justice warrior extreme type of people, type of people you see on Twitter a lot, you can see just in the way they speak and interact with people, there's a lot of hatred inside of them. Which would be the kind of the shadow presenting itself under this mask of empathy for trying to help some disaffected people.
Yeah, very true. Talking about examples with social justice warriors, what are the other examples that we talked about before the podcast started?
Yeah, so we were talking about how there's different examples from film and TV, which a lot of people will be aware of, because I think it's quite a common thing. It's basically in any sort of narrative, there's a character arc where the character transforms throughout the story, and a big part of that will be them intermingling with their shadow, whether that's them integrating it or it taking control of them. So a couple of different examples. One we spoke about before was Fight Club. So that the entire movie is kind of Tyler Durden is. I mean, I don't want to spoil the movie, so I guess skip this bit. I'm sure most people know the basic plot line. That Tyler Durden is a projection of the narrator, and that's basically because the narrator lives this kind of consumeristic, very passive,
non-aggressive,
socially conformist existence, and the internal desires for other things, particularly aggression, which, as the movie is about fighting and violence, particularly aggression is a big part of the thing that's bottled up inside of him, and the film creates that as like a literal representation of Tyler Durden as a projection of his mind.
Also, like the sexual desire with the
with Marla.
Marla,
yeah. That's a good point, because he's obviously attracted to Marla, but he refuses to believe that, and Tyler Durden is sleeping with Marla.
Getting down and dirty.
But so that's an example of where he's kind of where the things that are suppressed are kind of these masculine drives for aggression and violence, which when they're not integrated will often, we can get into this more a bit later
they manifest themselves in other ways.
They'll manifest themselves in other ways.
Another example that I didn't talk to you earlier about, that I just thought about, is there's a series called True Detective. We've heard about that, and it's basically about two detectives who have a case, and it's kind of a bit of a fucked up case, and then they solve it, but then it gets actually solved later on. And there's a character called Rust Cole, played by Matthew McConaughey, and like this guy is just, he's so well integrated his shadow. Like he comes off as a bit of a dickhead and like very short and like doesn't really care about other people's feelings, but he knows very much so who he is, and he's not afraid to show a bit of aggression and like dominate himself, dominate in front of others to like try and pursue this case and get to the killer. But like that's a really good series if anyone's looking for one. Like the characters in it are just so good. Especially this guy, he's just fucked.
In
a good way.
I haven't seen that. Maybe I'll have to watch it.
Oh, sick. I finished it yesterday and it's just so good. But any other examples we thought about?
We spoke about a couple more. There's American Psycho, which basically the premise of the movie is this guy, he's in corporate America. He's some like vice president of a company, but his entire existence is very kind of socially conformist, pursuing the same superficial things as everyone else, and he's not really in touch with his true self. Like there's a scene from the movie where he talks about where he's like getting ready in the morning, and he talks about how this whole, he kind of talks about his persona and how the entire thing is a mask to hide who he truly is. And obviously a key theme in that movie as well is the violence and the murders that he commits, which is kind of the manifestation of the suppressed parts of himself that occurs from living in such a superficial world. So that's another good example. And then we spoke about Breaking Bad as well. Do you want to comment on how Breaking Bad is another story about the shadow?
So I'm guessing most people know, well, most people maybe have watched it or at least know what it is, about the school teacher that becomes a absolute kingpin in meth. But he starts off, this character, he's a chemistry teacher, and he's very, like we were discussing, he's very timid, and he's very much so, I guess you could call him a pushover a bit. He's got a family, he's got a wife and a kid. But he's just this guy who's never really, it seems like he's never really asserted himself in a way that pushes him to achieve more, and something that is achievable to him. Like I think he had some work that he did and he was cited on a paper, but he should have got more credit if I'm remembering correctly.
Right.
And if he had this kind of aggression to push himself forward to be noticed for his great work, then maybe he would have achieved more in life and become happier. And then as the series goes on, he becomes this drug lord almost, and like because he didn't integrate his shadow, it seems like the shadow almost integrated him, and the shadow took over. Because he just became this like bit of a ruthless killer, this person who just forgot all about how you should treat others in a respectful way, I'd say, and just wanted to dominate and have power and money and greed. But it was interesting because until you brought it up, I didn't really think about it, but it's definitely a case of where when someone didn't integrate their shadow, the shadow kind of stays like suppressed, but still has space in their like lower unconsciousness to build up and become more powerful, and then eventually take over the person that
it can take control of you, rather than when you're aware of it and you integrate it, you can control it and use it how you want to. And in that movie, I guess you said, or that TV series, sorry, you said how he kind of lost his moral judgment in a way. He stopped caring about people. He stopped caring about the impact he had on people. So before he integrated his shadow, he had some of these positive traits, but when the shadow took possession of him, he kind of lost all of them. All those positive traits that were in the persona were kind of undermined because the whole time it was just a front, when in reality he had these deeper, darker things. And perhaps if the entire time he was a more assertive individual and he stood up for himself more, for example, and he worked to rather than just being resentful about things, to actually speak up for himself, he would have been a more dominant person, perhaps more successful in life, and wouldn't have become like evil, as you could put it.
He might not necessarily even become more successful, but I think like living your life in a way where you at least stand up for yourself, it seems to lead to a more satisfying life, because you have, I'm guessing what I'm trying to say is, when people don't stand up for themselves and don't take an aggressive stance when they think they need to, then they like almost feel guilty without realising. Like if you see someone like getting beat up or something and you didn't help them, you might not necessarily explicitly say to yourself, "Oh, I'm in the wrong for not helping," but I think most people would go home and feel like some sort of uneasiness because they've not lived their life in a just way. But I guess it's hard to navigate what you think is just, though, I guess.
Yeah, there's a moral debate there, and I think we'll maybe get into this more about the difficulties in coming to discover the shadow. But I think it is easy to use rationalizations, thinking I don't want to cause trouble because that would cause negative consequences. You can use that as a rationalization for the fact that you haven't got your aggression integrated, and that you don't actually know how to stand up for yourself or other people.
Just a coward.
You can rationalize it by saying that you're a nice person, which I think makes it very difficult to actually accept that there is this side to you, and that it would be better if it was integrated, because you see it as a virtue. So why would you want to?
Why would you want to
get rid of it?
I guess maybe that's one of the reasons why social justice warriors, like the radical ones at least, just don't seem to understand when they can be in the wrong sometimes, because they hold themselves as virtuous. What you get taught in life is virtues are good things that should be fought for and protected. So why would you want to fight against the virtue that you hold and fight for?
It's kind of hard to go back on yourself at that
point. Right, so I think we probably discussed it a little bit, but like, how do you think the shadow comes about? Because I remember, like, I've heard it a few times, I think from Jordan Peterson mainly, like he said, he's referenced a study where it's like the study of what subset of the population is the most aggressive is a group of 2-year-olds. Because 2-year-olds, like, that's when you kind of develop this that's when you like develop this like self-identity, I think, and that you become more human almost, and like your aggression is just on peak. And 2-year-olds are the most aggressive group of the population, but what happens is they get socialised out of them, and then they get taught by society or their family or their peers that these certain traits aren't acceptable and they are negative. So it seems like for me the shadow kind of comes about from the suppression of natural urges. From when you're young. What do you think?
I think that's definitely a cause of it. It can come from, like you said, kind of your parents or carers telling you to act in a certain way, or it can come more broadly from your peers or from like culture at large. Like culturally, there's things which are socially acceptable and not socially acceptable. And if you have a desire which urges you to do things which are socially unacceptable, then that will become repressed. I think that's how things I think that's how things become. I think that's the main way that they become repressed. Do you think there's any other ways?
Do you think an individual could repress themselves? Or just like, so an individual might think to themselves, this aggression is not a good thing because it can cause people to be upset, so I'm going to stop myself from having it. But ultimately, is that person's views on aggression still influenced by society and the like external world?
Yeah. I'd say it's influenced by the external world, but maybe in a different way. An example I've heard is that, for example, someone who has an aggressive father who like beat them or beat their mother or whatever might, because of that experience, they look at aggression as a completely wrong. Yeah. So when they grow older, as we spoke, there's some positive aspects to aggression, having confidence and being able to stand up for yourself.
Yeah.
Because they've completely repressed their aggression because they've characterised it as wrong.
Yeah.
They've denied a part of themselves, and they're not. They don't have the positive character traits as well that come with that.
So they they see one example of how this trait is used, and then they characterise every example of how that trait could be used in the same way.
Yeah, I guess so. I guess they characterise a trait as negative, and then because it's negative,
every single use it has is negative.
Yeah. Right, I guess they throw it all under one roof, and despite having those urges inside, because it's natural, different people will vary in how aggressive they are naturally, but everyone kind of has that inside of them, and I think it's quite common to repress it. But yeah, so I guess that would be how it comes about usually.
Yeah, it's kind of, I was going to say, it's kind of a sad thing that these shadows develop, but it seems it may be a necessary thing that these shadows develop, because you seems like you sort of want to tame children so they can like be socially accepted, so they can become part of society, so then they can learn about how society works, and then be able to learn how to build and produce value for that society. So maybe it's a necessity that the shadow is developed in everybody, but then also like the following on necessity is the embracing of it, and like at least the realization that you have one, and then trying to integrate it in the future, like when you become an adult maybe.
Yeah, I think that's the case with aggression. I believe the ideal scenario would be to integrate it from an early age. So, for example, with aggression, you could do that through sports, that type of thing. That's a way of channeling your aggression. But it's definitely a difficult problem, because with children, if they're being aggressive, you do need to control it. You can't just let them
go rampant.
And it's the same thing like sexual desires. Like, that's a difficult thing to manage when you're growing up, because you might not necessarily have opportunities to do that type of thing. I know I certainly didn't, but I guess so it's difficult for it not to become repressed, and ideally you wouldn't characterize these type of traits, these natural urges that you have, as entirely negative. You would find a way of integrating them in a proper way.
When we talked, like we said that aggression and sexual desire seems to be the two main like traits that form part of the shadow, and then you said just then like playing sports is kind of a good way to integrate that from a young age. Do you think physical activity is the only way that you can like integrate aggression maybe into yourself, or is it other ways maybe? No,
definitely not. So I'd say with aggression specifically, the issue people run into, I think, when they have repressed their aggression, is usually that they can't stand up for themselves, and they'll become resentful about something, but they're not willing to say it. They're not willing to stand up for themselves, because they're out of touch with a part of themselves which has the confidence and has the assertiveness to do that type of thing. So I think, we can get into how to integrate the shadow more later in the episode.
Yeah.
But I think a key way is just having awareness of your reactions to things, and if you don't like something, than standing up for yourself. I think that's probably the most important way to do it.
Yeah, I think you're right. I don't think sport is the only way to integrate aggression. But from what I've learned over my whole life, it seems like sport is something that every single person should do, and I think it does help with aggression if you can. Like the classic saying is, if you're, well, it's not a classic saying, but I know Jordan Peterson talks about it a lot. If you have the ability to be dangerous, then it's most likely that you won't actually need to be dangerous.
Yeah.
And having people play sports that gets them to become a more powerful human being physically, it seems to tame them physically and mentally.
Yeah.
So I think it should be something that it's a necessity for the aggression, but like you're saying, there's other ways to integrate aggression and like act it out in life in a positive way other than sport.
Yeah, I think you have that element of like physical exercise itself being a way of channeling your aggression into something good. But I also think that with sport as well, because it's a competition, taking part in competition, because competitiveness is kind of an aggressive trait. It requires assertiveness. It requires you to kind of want to impose your will to win the game, or whatever. So I think taking part in that competitiveness is another important aspect of exercise, and I guess you could get that through other activities as well. But I think that's definitely important for kind of developing and integrating the shadow as well.
Yeah, maybe there should be like, obviously you shouldn't force anyone to do anything, but maybe like physical activity should be used to channel that aggression. But even something like a debate club that everyone has to take part in, because like doing like a proper debate with someone is just a mental way of competing with them. Like you are trying to enforce your will of how to think on them. Not that you're trying to like literally enforce them to think this the way you do, but you're trying to force them to listen to the way you think at least. And like that does take some sort of aggression to be disagreeable and like assertive in your beliefs.
Yeah, definitely. By doing that, you're developing your disagreeableness. So yeah, we spoke a lot there about aggression and integrating aggression, but I guess it would go for other traits as well. And I also think it's important that for some people, you mentioned at the start of the episode that some people will naturally be tough, like the persona they want to present to the world is a tough person. Do you think in that case, for that person, their shadow would be a softer, more emotional side that they've rejected, so they're not connected with? Do you think that would be the shadow for that person?
I think it is. I think it was Jordan Peterson and Robert Greene, where they had an interview on Peterson's podcast. They were talking about, they were kind of discussed like the Machiavellian traits that young men have and why they're so attractive to young women. Yeah. And it was sort of like, I can't remember exactly, it was sort of like women see this, what would you say?
They see these negative traits as manifesting like confidence.
Yeah, they see this confidence. They see this like unfearful confidence that a man has, where he kind of acts like a dick and shit. They see that as attractive, but when they get older, they realise they don't realise this explicitly, but they get older and they actually stop seeing it as that, because when they're young, they don't have the ability to see that unfearless confidence in the right way. So when they're young, they see that unfearless confidence as unfearless confident competence. So they see it as someone who's confident in themselves, so they must be smart. But as they get older, they develop the ability to understand like if this person actually is a good person or whatever. And what Robert Greene was kind of saying, like that unfearless confidence comes across as like, oh, this guy knows who he is and what he's about, but like he didn't say their shadow necessarily, but he said they're usually like the most insecure people. And there's a few people I know at uni who like, you could argue like get girls all the time, and they like have this kind of attitude about them when they're out and drinking. And then the way I know them is that, but they're also, the way I know them is sober, and they very much can't be alone, and they love to be with other people because they can't sit by themselves because they're quite insecure. So I definitely think the shadow can form itself as these like insecurities. But it kind of goes back to my question at the start, like does the shadow have to have these negative qualities of like aggression and dominance? But maybe the question I asked was wrong, and maybe it should have been. Does the shadow also like include other negative traits that are more about insecurities?
Yeah, I think it can actually. When I was doing some research for the episode, 3 things. So there's this list of 3 things that can be, that will cause you to repress something. I think one of them was like it being socially unacceptable. One other was evil, and then another one was weakness. So you want to hide your weakness from other people, and I guess that would be that's actually where that applies for types of people who maybe don't have a problem with aggression, but they're scared of looking insecure to other people.
Yeah, they have these, possibly they view them as feminine characteristics that they think would like, what's the word? It would kind of deplete their dominance that they want us to assert in the world.
Yeah.
And like, they kind of maybe they view dominance as like the thing they need to maintain in life to be successful or be happy.
Yeah.
Because that's how they've lived their lives there.
Yeah.
Since they were born. And if you kind of introduce feminine characteristics and vulnerability, that definitely strips away especially the stereotypically male dominance that someone might have, and that could like crash their whole idea of why they are the way they are. Yeah.
Yeah, it's and in that case, it's just another classic case of it being suppressed because they don't want people to know about it, but in it being suppressed, you don't have control over it, and it'll probably come to bite you. And a different type of thing that I've heard about the shadow is that so it's not necessarily just these emotions, but an example I've heard is so if you're trying to pursue something, but the reason you're trying to pursue it is for the sake of social conformity, or like an example I heard, I think, is like if you've chosen your degree because your parents made you do it. When you're working on your degree, what will happen is seemingly out of nowhere, from inside, you'll just self-sabotage in your studies.
Yeah.
So I guess that could come in the form of procrastination, but the reason for that is that you've got a desire inside you to do something else, to do something different, but on the surface you're trying to pursue this thing because other people have made you do it.
Yeah.
That's a different type of desire, but so I guess it can just apply to any kind of desire inside that you decide to suppress. That can manifest as part of the shadow.
Yeah, I never thought about that, because you always see that in movies, don't you? Like not to stereotype, but it's the classic, like I remember seeing a movie, it's like the classic Asian stereotype. The Asian kid gets forced to go to college and try and be a doctor.
Yeah.
And a lot of them do become really successful with it. Like, you'll see 1 or 2 that's just in the movies anyway, that like just fucking hates it and just goes out and parties all the time and becomes this rebel kid.
Yeah.
It's almost like, I mean, there's like a sort of belief I have is like the stricter the parent, almost the more rebellious the child will be.
Yeah.
And so in some cases, I wouldn't say necessarily in all cases, but I guess when I say rebellious, I could argue not that they like go out and break the rules, but more rebellious in terms of like the relationship they have with their parent. Like, to me, if a parent is more strict, it seems like their kid will be more rebellious in terms of rebelling against the relationship they have with their parent. Like, a parent that's trustworthy of their children has a good relationship where they communicate and are open and truthful with each other. Whereas as a parent who's strict with their child, they have very much a distant relationship where they don't really talk to each other on like a deep level, I'd say. I think that kind of happens a lot in the world, from my point of view anyway.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. Obviously there's a balance to be had, because you do need to discipline your children a certain amount in order for them to be well socialised and well behaved. And this is actually something I was questioning as I was thinking about integrating the shadow. It's about, like, to what extent should you suppress your emotions, so to speak. Like the type of person, like Jocko kind of talks. He says it kind of ironically, like, suppress your emotions, but
detach.
Yeah, but but there's obviously tremendous value in being able to detach from your emotions and ignore them for the sake of being disciplined and doing something that you need to do.
Mm-hmm.
To what extent should you do that versus listening to your emotions and your internal desires and saying, you know what, this internal desire needs to be listened to and accounted for.
Yeah.
Like, to what degree can you suppress something versus needing to integrate it?
I guess that question would, like, it'd have to be done on an individual basis. But I think the way that you would figure that out, you'd have to judge the action that would come from the desire to feel that trait. You'd have to judge that action based on your own morals, and obviously that could be a whole conversation in itself. But you have to, people need to be aware of what they kind of believe in, and like they need to. To be fair, I think this is something that a lot of people suffer with. They don't actually know what principles they want to live their life by. And if you do understand that, I think that will give you better judgment for when you want to integrate your shadow.
Yeah.
Like, a very extreme example of that I could give, referencing what you were saying, especially when it comes to Jung, like sexual desire. If someone's out, well, it happens a lot, unfortunately. If someone's out and they have a sexual desire to sleep with a girl, should they just give in to that desire and just go sleep with that girl regardless of anything?
No, obviously not.
Obviously not. And like, someone can obviously have principles and judge the actions they could take and do that in a better way. They could try and sleep with that girl by trying to charm them, and like, if they have reciprocated feelings, then it can happen. But that's because they taken action based on the principles they want to live their life by, and they've integrated their shadow, their sexual desire and their aggression to be dominant in a public area with this woman.
To have the confidence to go up and approach her, for example. So that would be the proper way of integrating it.
Yeah, that's a good question though. It's a difficult one though, but like, I guess it might also be determined by your personality traits and like what kind of like type of person you are. Like, are you introverted or extroverted? Maybe that'll have an influence.
But I guess it comes back to the question of, so if you have a goal for something, let's say. So you gave the example there of introverted and extroverted. If you're introverted but you have a goal which would be associated with becoming more extroverted, so you want to build your social confidence or whatever,
or become like a manage a team as a leader.
Yeah. So in that case, I feel like you're inevitably you are somewhat going to have to go against your own nature, and you are going to have to force yourself to do something. I'd say that's definitely a positive thing. If you have that kind of goal, you should take action to pursue it, and it's going to be difficult, but it's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you are going against your natural desires. But
I agree with you, but like, when there's an introverted person, for this example, like an introverted person might not want to take that leadership position, but when they are in a team as a follower and have to be directed by another person, I still think that they have these suppressed emotions of, well, I could have done a fucking better job. Like, if just let me do the fucking job, I would have actually done this the right way. So I feel like, in terms of that example...
it goes both ways, actually. So, with that example, you kind of... like the introverted person, maybe they have to go against their internal desires in one way, but in another way, they're integrating their shadow by becoming more confident to interact with someone. Yeah,
I guess maybe skipping ahead a little bit, like Jordan Peterson talks about it in terms of like, when you try and integrate your shadow, you have this conversation with yourself about how you're treated almost, and like, if you think you're treated wrong, you have to really think about it and be truthful. If you think you are treated that wrong, you need to do something about it and take action. Or if you see it's something that's actually acceptable, it's just a bit of an annoyance, you just need to shut the fuck up and
grow up.
Just grow up and get the fuck on with your life.
Yeah.
So maybe it would depend on, in that example, is the person that's leading a good leader and leading in the right way? Then the person who's introverted might be a bit upset that the leader's doing it a little bit differently to how they would, but they can still live with it because it's not really that big of a deal.
Yeah, I guess it's hard to know, and like with that example, it's possible that the person who's resentful about the poor management actually just lacks experience and doesn't really understand how things work. And in that case, maybe they have to go through some sort of trial and error. But I do kind of think it's maybe better for them to go to err on the side of taking action, because if you take action and it's wrong, then you find out you might make a bit of a fool of yourself, but
it's very informative.
But you learn from it. Whereas if you just keep that bottled up and don't deal with it properly, then you don't make any progress with it.
There's a big difference between practicality and like being theoretical.
Yeah.
Like you can think how a situation might go, but if you, like you were saying, just take action, you will know how it will go, and you get this real life experience that does inform you so much better than just sitting with your thoughts and thinking about the same topic for a few hours.
Yeah.
Although there's definitely a benefit to that as well, but
yeah, obviously it's situational and you need to consider the situation, but at a certain point perhaps it's better to err on the side of taking action, and maybe that's a takeaway from this. You should, if you're in doubt about something, if you're resentful about something, you should err on the side of speaking up about it. Or else you kind of, even if you are wrong, if you don't say anything, then you don't realise you're wrong. So you do kind of need to test it. But there will be some level of trial and error. And back to this idea of like discipline versus
design,
kind of suppressing your emotions versus integrating shadow, paying attention to your emotions. I think there is certainly a tension between those two ideas, but discipline probably will be required. Like as you said, there could be a situation where the introverted person has to go against their nature to become more confident and assertive. But the reason they're doing it is to integrate that shadow because they're resentful about a situation, and in that case they do need to be disciplined to take the difficult action.
Right, yeah.
That would be required to address the problem that they're resentful about. But yeah, there's some moving parts to that one.
Yeah, definitely. Some moving parts to fucking everything, isn't there?
Yeah. Should we move on to either the benefits or of integrating or
so sort of like why should we embrace the shadow? One thing I've kind of thought about myself is like, it seems like when you have an integrated shadow, like it doesn't necessarily need to be explicitly shown or told to others. I think when you have an integrated shadow, it's kind of implicitly identified and accepted by others, as long as the traits that arise from the shadow aren't like tyrannical and like negative.
Yeah. And
I sort of believe that would inform others that you're authentic, and therefore it would make you more trustworthy to them.
Yeah.
Although going against that, you could argue like if others haven't explored their shadow, they might view the traits that you show in an authentic way as negative.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, it kind of goes back to that saying like real recognize real, like as a silly example, like if someone has an integrated shadow and they see and they can kind of identify the same with you, they would have a more trustworthy relationship, those two people. And it kind of leads back to that discussion we had about capitalism. Like, you'd much rather deal with an openly greedy person than like a secretly manipulative person who has ulterior motives.
Yeah.
So I think if you have an integrated shadow, it seems like people will be more likely to trust you or take you in good faith, maybe, even if you might come across as rude or like assertive in certain situations.
Yeah.
That's one example I kind of came up with myself, and there's other examples that I've gotten of other people.
Yeah. Yeah, it's authenticity, like that is the fundamental thing about what integrating the shadow is. It's about being authentic to your true self.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think there's a quote, I think it's from Carl Jung, that he said he'd rather be whole than good.
Yeah.
Something like that. So that kind of talks about how you need to integrate your negative traits in order to be kind of a complete person, or else the good that you're presenting is kind of just a facade. But another part to that is, and we spoke a bunch about the idea. We always come back to the idea of the higher man in the herd. It's what the podcast is about. But basically, that the higher man kind of separates himself from the herd, which is the majority of people, by perhaps aiming. In a certain case, they would. In this case, they'd be aiming to integrate that shadow. That's the type of thing that someone with the goal of like self-actualization would do. And people who are part of the herds might go against that. So to some degree, like you will get pushback from other people, but in theory, if you've integrated your aggression and your assertiveness, you won't really give a shit. But
that's true.
But yeah, I think that's maybe part of it. But to be honest, what you were saying about people taking you, I think it's definitely true that if you're a more integrated and whole person, people can take you for your word. Yeah. And it's not just like an image. It's not just like an arbitrary thing that they would take you for your word. It's actually because your word is more valuable. Yeah. Because your motivations are kind of aligned with your personality. I think that's a big part of what integrating the shadow is to align your internal desires with with the way you present yourself in the world, the actions you take in the world. Yeah. You're aligning.
You want to show people who you really are, kind of. Yeah. Not explicitly, but
you're aligning your actions with your values.
Ah, okay, yes.
Yeah. Which I think that might have been in the title of the second episode or first episode of the podcast. Aligning your actions with your values. So yeah.
Yeah, because like a silly example would be if you're integrated, you become more authentic and more trustworthy. Like a silly example would be someone that like maybe doesn't have an integrated shadow and is always nice to people. Do you know that like you might not remember the actual person, but you'll always have a memory of a person that just gives compliments to every single person. It's like, oh my god, like you look so nice today, and like blah blah blah. I feel like girls do this a lot as well. Like especially on Instagram, like oh my god, Slay Queen, 10 out of 10, so hot. No man deserves this. Blah. And like they're just trying to be nice and have these virtues that present themselves as like empathetic and like kind. Mm-hmm. But if you truly have an integrated shadow, you're not going to fucking bother with these stupid little comments. So when you do actually say something nice, it really does come across as genuine. Yeah. Rather than just like, if somebody always says, oh, you look nice today, you look nice, you look nice. Whereas that person who doesn't really talk, once a week goes, really like that jacket on you, you're like, shit.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Because if it looked shit, then they tell you.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, it's, I mean, a bit of a tangent, but it's an interesting moral debate. Like, are white lies a bad thing? Because they can kind of have good intentions, but if it's not completely truthful, is it a problem?
This is like one of the things that I think some people and I initially struggled with Robert Greene, like his books, like the 48 Powers of Law, the Laws of Human Nature, and like these other like all of his books seem to be about recognizing power and like integrating your own shadow. It's like maybe not all of them, but I know one of the rules in like is it like the 366 laws, a law a day or something. One of the laws is to like give people compliments at appropriate times, and he says like not necessarily that you believe what you're saying, but feeding people these little like moments of like appreciation and like compliments, it builds them up and it makes them like you more. And that's very disingenuous on his part, but he's doing it in a manipulative way, but it's not for necessarily manipulative.
You can argue
reasons.
that the net outcome is positive. Okay.
Yeah, he's not trying to abuse power and like make the other person's life worse. He's just trying to make them like him more, so he can get by in life a bit easier.
Yeah. Yeah, it's difficult. I say.
Because integrating the shadow for selfish reasons, but are we not all just selfish at the end of the day?
It's a good point. But yeah, I think that is the risk of you building up this kind of facade, and perhaps you should try and err on the side of genuine compliments rather than flattery wherever possible.
Yeah. It's a difficult one. I don't know. It was weird that like, all these kind of like maybe not all of them, but like a lot of books like that, and like how to, like business minded books are kind of like how do you manipulate the external environment to serve you the best way.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of a bit like, oh fucking hell, is that all humanity is? Like, do we need to really manipulate each other so we can get ahead in life? Are we not able to just live in a world where we kind of help each other out every now and then so we all have like a good baseline?
Yeah.
But then I guess that's maybe just like a fucking, maybe too much of a pessimistic. What's the word? Not what's the opposite? Pessimistic.
Optimistic.
Optimistic.
Pessimistic.
Maybe that's too much of an optimistic view of the world.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd like to think that you can be. I'd like to think that you can have as much success as you're capable of by being completely genuine.
Right. Yeah.
It may be a more difficult path, but I think an important part of integrating the shadow is telling the truth and being very solid with the truth. So, like, you give the example of someone asks, "Oh, does this look good on me?" and you say yes, even though you don't believe it. It's like, okay, maybe that's all right, but what if we take that and say, "Oh, do you want to go?" You're choosing where to go out to eat or something, and then you say, "Oh, do you want to go here?" and then you say yes just to please the person.
Mm-hmm.
And if you fall into the habit of just taking the easy option, which avoids trouble in the short term, then I think that is a risk of building up some resentment inside that you're not really living the life you want to, because it's not even the life you want to, it's more the point more is living a life more in line with the true way that you see the world. Because I feel like it's just very difficult to go anywhere if you're living in this facade. It comes back to perhaps it would be wrong sometimes for you to live out to act out what you think is true. Like maybe you'd make a fool of yourself. We kind of said this before, but in service of acting out what you believe to be true, even if you are wrong, you maintain aligned with the truth. Whereas if you're just nice to people and say yes to everything, even when sometimes you might think, I don't actually want to do that, and someone asks, "Oh, do you want to do this?" and you're like, yeah, I'll do it. I think there is a bit of a risk, and it goes both. I'd say it goes both ways in terms of sometimes that'll be being nice to people, but you also see a lot online nowadays in like the manosphere, like people telling you to be deliberately disrespectful or mean to women to make them like you more. Yeah. There's the old saying, like,
treat them mean, keep them keen.
Treat them mean, keep them keen. Like that type of thing. Like, that's not a particularly genuine way of going about interacting with someone. So that's gone to the other way. Rather than being nice to them, you're being deliberately like the opposite. You're being deliberately rude to them. But neither of those things are aligned with the truth, and perhaps you'd get the best balance if you were genuinely aligned with the truth. But it is difficult because in your interactions with people, like to be good in interactions with people, do you somewhat need to tailor that if you're just completely blunt about what you think? And then I don't know. For some people that might err on the side of never sticking up for themselves. For other people that might err on the side of being rude to people.
Yeah. I think maybe the being rude to people isn't something that should be desired, but like one of the benefits I've seen from integrating the shadow or heard about is like embracing the shadow. It helps you to set boundaries on how you're treated. Yeah. Like you can use assertiveness and disagreeableness to create limits on how others treat you, and like that will take courage, because disagreeing with someone and like standing up for yourself, that can lead to negative consequences, and it can escalate if like the other person like receives it in a negative manner. And like the example like I saw Jordan Peterson talk about was like he had a neighbour who was just causing him bare havoc because Jordan Peterson was doing a bit of work on his house, and Jordan closed the cupboard, and like the cupboard closed and you could hear like a cupboard just going, and the neighbour's like banging on the wall telling him to shut the fuck up basically. And Jordan Peterson integrated shadow, went over to them and said, "Do you really need to do that?" And they were like, "Well, no, but blah 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 blah." And then he was just like, "What if you want to?" Like, he basically said, "Like, if you want to fucking go to war with me, I'm gonna cause you so much mayhem that you'll wish you never even started." And then they fucking stopped and shut up. And like, he became, not physically, but he probably became very verbally aggressive.
Yeah.
And he set a boundary on how he wants to be treated, and like, it actually worked out for the better.
Yeah.
And it seems like that is a good thing. But when you're talking about integrating shadow in terms of treating other people disrespectfully, well, especially women, I don't really know if that is integrating the shadow, because I still feel like if you do that, you still have some sort of insecurity. Kind of goes back to like that dickhead like lad who gets all the girls.
Yeah.
They still are very insecure about something in themselves, so they haven't really fully integrated the shadow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd say that's right. And I guess it just comes to what you were saying. Like, it goes for relationships as well. You need to have certain boundaries, and if you're just honest with yourself about the way you feel and about the situation, then you're not going to be a pushover.
Yeah.
But you don't need to be outright like rude to people.
Yeah.
Although it seems like that certainly does work, but I guess it's kind of a short-term thing if you're not actually.
Yeah, I think it breaks down relationships.
If you're not being authentic over time, you kind of be discovered for that. So yeah, it's definitely important to be authentic, and that kind of brings me into, like you mentioned there, kind of setting boundaries, and like that's the case in relationships. And when I was researching like the positive aspects of integrating the shadow, if you pull up my document, it's basically so some of the things Carl Jung listed was for positive aspects of the shadow was so it says good qualities such as normal instincts, appropriate reactions, realistic insights, and creative impulses. We can get into the last two in a second, but normal instincts and appropriate reactions, the way I kind of see that is, it made me think of this podcast I heard Chris Williamson on, and he was kind of talking about the sexual revolution, how now childbirth has been separated from sex, that people think they can divorce the emotions from sex, but that's not really possible. So people have like these open relationships or whatever, and like they'll have feelings of like jealousy, for example, but that feeling is actually a good thing because it allows you to, so it's a natural instinct, and if you act in line with that, then you will set boundaries that don't allow yourself to feel jealousy. As I mentioned, in like an open relationship, that's obviously something people would feel. So being in touch with your natural instincts in that way will allow you to set boundaries, for example.
I mean, it helps you be treated the way you want to be. Yeah, I think it's true. Like that, like another reason you might want to integrate your shadow is to like stop you becoming resentful. Like the example you gave earlier about if someone asks you to go, like for example, a girlfriend, if they ask you to go out to dinner to this certain restaurant, but you don't actually want to eat there because you've had it before and you don't like the food or the cuisine or whatever. If you just carry on saying yes to all these little details and like events, whether you like it or not, it seems like resentment will build up in you, and like over time, in Jordan Peterson's eyes at least, like that is culture destroying and soul crushing.
Yeah,
and it definitely seems to me like resentment. Yeah, resentment. Like it just creates these, like Peterson says, like these fantasies that people have. Like they might not realize it, but like eventually they'll start to like conjure up these wild dreams of like maybe hurting people in certain ways, or like just being like ultra aggressive because they've bottled down and suppressed their real feelings about how they want to be treated.
That's like exactly what the shadow is, those suppressed feelings, and we can get into it a bit more later, but fantasies of whatever, like your fantasies are a good way of realizing what things are repressed and what your shadow wants.
Another thing I saw this guy called the Boyo podcast, this Irish guy. He loves like talking about Nietzsche, I think Freud as well, and Jung, and he basically was saying something along the lines of like a person should want to raise their standards, like i.e. like standards of living, and like he says, like although lust and sexual desire are like naked self-interest, they are basically they are emotions that want the higher standard, and he says that this is noble and good. Like your lust for something and your desire for something helps you push towards the future and helps you build up towards that point that you want to get to, and like that is a good thing. And it's hard to find like in the emotions of anger, frustration, aggression, and like competitiveness. It's hard to find like nobility and goodness, but you can use those emotions to like drive up your standards. And like the example he gave was, he lived in a city while recording the podcast, and he was pissed off because he could hear noises from drills and like cars outside beeping.
Yeah.
And that anger to him can be redirected to discipline, to earning more money and moving out to a quieter area.
Yeah.
So like these like suppressed shadow traits have a lot of power in them, and you can use those to raise yourself up.
Yeah. I think it definitely requires some time of introspection though. So when we talk about methods of integrating the shadow, so at first, the first thing is there's something that annoys you, something you become resentful about, and you can realise through either your emotional reactions to that thing, or through fantasies that you're having, that there's an issue there. And then so you realise that there's an issue, and then it takes some time of introspection to think. You ask yourself the question: Is this an actual issue that needs to be addressed, or am I just being childish about it and I need to grow up? So that requires some thought, and then obviously, if it's something you just need to grow up about, then hopefully, if you've had a good think about it, then you're like, yeah, actually, I've processed this emotion. Now I've thought about it and I realise it's not actually a problem. I just need to deal with it. Yeah. But perhaps sometimes you might say that, but if it's something that keeps coming up, then maybe you need to address it. Or if in your introspection you realise, yeah, this is a problem, I need to address it, then you can make a plan of action. I really like this idea of taking, so in this case you take negative emotion and then you turn that into a goal for the future, which working towards that goal gives you positive emotion. So I think it's a great way of dealing with negative emotions, that kind of introspection, but it does take some time, it does take awareness.
Yeah, the path to fixing that negative emotion brings you positive emotion. Is that what you're saying? Yeah, that sort of makes sense, yes. Is that if you're ultimately taking away negative emotion, positive emotion, do you think the positive emotion kind of goes up proportionally?
No, well, I think why it is because setting goals and working towards them, that gives you positive emotion.
Right. Okay.
So what you've done is you had this negative emotion, which may or may not still exist, but in setting the goal, which will move you away from the thing causing you that negative emotion. Yeah. In setting that goal, you're giving yourself a source of positive emotion, because anytime you work towards that goal, you get positive emotion. We spoke about in the dopamine episode. So that's a case of through your mesocortical circuit, to get technical. So that's your control circuit, basically the dopamine circuit, which is responsible for planning and calculation. So you've taken some time to plan and calculate how you can get a better future. So you get dopamine from that itself, but then anytime you work towards that goal, that's when you're more getting dopamine from like the reward system. That's the way I understand it, at least. So you take an action, and you're moving towards this goal, so you get a boost in dopamine from that. So that's where you're getting the positive emotion.
Nice. Yeah, it's definitely. Do you think what is the relation between like the higher man concept from Nietzsche and the shadow? Like you sort of referenced it earlier, but I know that those two psychologists influence each other quite a lot, and it seems like in terms of like what I saw, like when people don't integrate the shadow, they kind of see themselves as having high morals because they treat everyone in such a nice way and stuff like that, and in such a friendly manner.
Yeah.
It seemed like Nietzsche kind of regarded morality as cowardice, not necessarily because he thought morality itself was a cowardice thing to do, like to have, but because it seemed like everybody that described themselves as having high morals were in fact just superficial cowards that weren't able to stand up for themselves because they were too afraid of the consequences of being seen as like rude or in a like negative light. And that kind of directly, in my eyes, relates to integrating the shadow. People are too scared and suppress these emotions because they want to seem to the outside world as like having high morals and virtuous, whereas realistically maybe they're just cowards. Do you mean that those two things like link up quite well, or?
Yeah. So one of the things about the herds, I think, so we spoke a bunch about how people in the herds act based on social conformity, but I also think another element of people in the herds is they're at the whims of their emotional desires. So when you don't have a higher goal, you're kind of pulled by the strings of whichever emotion shows up at any point. Right. So I think in integrating the shadow, you become more in touch with your desires, and they become more properly aligned with your actions, and you're actually more capable of pursuing a higher goal than if you never took the time to consider that. And I guess with the social conformity part, like that's a crossover between the herd and people who haven't integrated the shadow, because part of the reason you repress things into the shadow is because they're socially unacceptable.
Right.
And then the herd acts in a way which is socially conformist, so people think that's good. So yeah, I think socially the pressures are the same way, and yeah, something the higher man needs to do in order to actualize their potential, which is another key component of being a higher man. You need to aiming to actualize your potential. That will involve integrating yourself and becoming whole as a person.
Yeah. What would you say maybe, like after this conversation, could someone go away and anytime they see an example of someone being a bit of a rude dickhead, do you think they might think, oh, man's got a shadow in himself and he knows it, or what?
Well, there's an issue of, okay, so that's a person manifesting some aggression, but the fact that manifesting aggression doesn't necessarily mean that they've integrated their shadow in a positive way.
Right.
So, for example, there might be some. I visualize this guy who's like a middle-aged man or a middle-aged woman complaining to some person who works in a shop when there's some sort of error which wasn't even their fault. They're just letting their aggression out all over, like, on this person. Yeah. But yeah, they're just. But that would be a case of a person. Okay, they're showing aggression there, but that's a shadow taking control of them, because realistically, right, like this isn't them integrating and showing their aggression in a positive way. This isn't them standing up for what's important and what's right to get the right outcome. This is them just unnecessarily being rude and horrible to someone. So.
Yeah. Not in a controlled manner. They've just like
it kind of possesses them, and I don't think that's necessarily a good thing.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, you could. I guess it would depend on the context, but if you see someone, there's a balance to be had, because in some circumstances you are going to want to censor yourself, so as not to be rude unnecessarily. But also there might be situations where you are rude, but you're telling the truth, but you may be putting it in a slightly harsh way, and you can argue whether that's appropriate or not. But
right, yeah.
So it would depend on the circumstance, but yeah, you can. It's maybe something you can go away and do is kind of observe other people when they manifest anger. Is this something that are they manifesting it because they've integrated it properly, or are they Just
letting the emotion take control of their actions.
Is emotion taking control of them, or are they acting in accordance with their values and kind of using their emotions in some way to guide them? Because like, it is like we spoke about the tension between suppressing your emotions versus taking them into account. So yeah, there was a bit of tension there still.
Do you think you can?
It's hard to tell entirely.
Do you think you can sort of quite easily identify when someone is channeling these possibly like assertive emotions and traits, and they're doing it in like an integrated way? Can you tell the difference between someone doing that and someone letting the emotion take control over their actions? Or do you think that takes it's a skill that's hard to learn, or maybe people are born with it or not? Maybe it's a bit of intuition.
Yeah, no, I think you can tell. For example, if someone's manifesting their aggression by talking about someone behind their back, then then they're repressing it. Right. When they're interacting pleasantly with the person.
Yeah, rather than confronting the person for an action that they might disagree with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's an example, but I guess it's pretty contextual, and there may be situations where you think that someone's properly that someone's being appropriately aggressive, but it might just be a coincidence that their aggression is coming out at this time. They might just actually be not in control of it.
Yeah.
But they're letting it out, and you can, and there'll be some subjectiveness to whether you think it's appropriate in different scenarios. But yeah, I guess people kind of need to navigate that themselves and try and maybe just pay more attention to their own actions. I think it's the most important thing. That the way that they feel themselves, because maybe it's difficult to tell in other people because you don't know exactly what they're feeling at different points. Whereas with yourself, if you have some mindfulness about it, then you can be more aware of what you're feeling during how you're reacting to different things
and the reasons you're feeling it and stuff.
Yeah.
I remember I heard Jordan Peterson talk about when you have an integrated shadow. Like when I said, do you think when you see someone has like a dickhead, you might just think, oh, they've got a good integrated shadow? Peterson was saying something like, when a person has like fairly developed and integrated their own shadow, they develop like a strange like grace, like they bring out this aggressive side to them, but along with that comes this feminine side, he said. And like if it kind of goes back to what we were saying, like these people are more comfortable asserting themselves, but they're also more comfortable being vulnerable.
Yeah.
Which is like something I didn't think would happen when you integrate your shadow, but
yeah,
it's a nice idea. I don't know if it's maybe 100% like true for the whole population, but
yeah, I think it is right, because it's the case that both of those things come back to authenticity. So you're in line with the truth, so you'll just be able to connect with people more because you're showing your real self. Whereas if it's just a superficial layer, then you know
it's hard to connect.
You won't be able to connect because you can't show your real self, or you'd be exposing yourself if this kind of facade is what you present to people.
Do you think people can connect to you though? Because I feel like someone can kind of go about their life, never maybe show their true emotions to someone, but can always act in an emotional way around others, and I feel like other people can truly connect to them, and like they might feel as though they're really connected to this individual, although this individual might like not really have much emotional feeling, so they won't connect to the people they interact with, but the other people will feel at least like connected to that person. Do you think that can happen?
Yeah, I don't.
Does connectedness have to be a two-way street?
I think like genuine connection would have to be a two-way street, but there's obviously cases where, for example, like psychopaths who want to manipulate people, like the person they're manipulating may feel very strongly connected to them, whereas the psychopath just views them as an NPC.
Yeah.
So it's hard to put it harshly, but yeah, I mean I think that's how psychopaths do view people. They view them as NPCs. That's what people say, but I wouldn't know personally.
Oh really? Yeah.
Yeah. Where was I? I kind of exposed myself there.
Yeah.
Anyway.
A little bit.
Yeah, maybe cut that out. No. But yeah, so I think people can. I think true connection would be two ways, but people can. There can be an illusion there if they're connected with someone, and perhaps in order to bring out someone's genuine self, like another method of doing that might be to, if they come across someone who they really trust and can connect with, then they can actually allow their true self to come out. Whereas if they, in the past, were surrounded by people that they just didn't feel that they trusted, or that they felt they could have the vulnerability to be authentic with, then they're going to repress their true selves in fear of judgment or for whatever reason.
It's like when it's like when a parent doesn't, when a parent lets their kid behave in a way that they don't agree with, that parent can like become resentful of that kid and almost hate that kid in an unconscious way. And then when that kid like comes and says to them, "Oh, I'll put loads of effort," it doesn't say this explicitly, but like they come and show them a drawing they did, the parent, rather than showing attention and like hyping the kid up a little bit, even if it's shit, like they just kind of push it to the side and go, "Oh yeah, nice one." And like the kid feels that, and like when they open up to their parent, they're meant to be greeted with open arms and in a comforting way. So when they get bitten by that fucking sharp interaction, they don't want to be vulnerable with someone. But like you're saying, in the future, if that kid meets someone and the person they meet completely opens up, it makes the kid feel comfortable enough to open up in a way.
Yeah, in that case, it kind of brings on to one of the other points, because in the good aspects of the shadow, one of them that was listed there was like creativity or something. So that would be a case where someone represses their creativity. I guess it would be out of fear of judgment because of past experiences. They deem their creativity as something to be ashamed of because they have been punished for it in the past. And creativity, I think, is something which really exposes your authentic self, and like showing someone your drawing, that's like exposes you to judgment. So if they build up this fear of judgment, then they can repress their creativity.
Right.
Whereas if they, how do you think someone could go about uncovering their creativity if that was part of repressing the shadow? Because we spoke about for aggression how you'd stand up for yourself, for example, but with creativity, is that something they can realise by just paying attention to their own internal desires and pursuing things they're interested in, maybe?
I don't know, because when you think about like these creative people that have like done amazing work in the world, like Joe Rogan says, he seems to think that the most creative people almost have like the most traumatic childhoods. If someone has like a traumatic childhood, I don't know if that necessarily sets them up to integrate their shadow so they can become creative. I would always kind of think the other way around, like a person who has a traumatic childhood maybe doesn't learn how to integrate themselves and doesn't learn how to integrate the shadow into themselves.
Yeah.
But they still have these amazing like works of art. So it doesn't really make sense to me. Maybe they do have an integrated shadow, or maybe they don't.
Yeah, well, I think the artwork itself, like if it's good artwork, then it will be an authentic expression. I think almost.
Do you think maybe these creative people, like integrating their shadow, can be on a time timed limit? So when they're by themselves in their studios, art studio, recording studio, whatever, they integrate their shadow and they kind of get these dark feelings, and then they like let that emotion out onto the canvas, onto the recording like software or whatever.
Yeah.
But then when they're out in public and like interacting with other people, that shadow gets repressed again. Do you think that can happen, or do you think once you've integrated a shadow, it kind of stays?
Yeah, well, I think that can certainly be the case. Like someone could be quite creative in private, but then scared to be authentic in person. But I do think expressing yourself authentically through art is probably a way of you're becoming a more authentic person, so you're more likely to be more authentic in your real life. particularly if you're sharing that art out there. Like, something I've noticed with this podcast is because obviously we're sitting down and we're talking to each other about like our kind of raw, true opinions and views on things and our values. That I think that's made me more authentic, just in kind of day-to-day life, because I've sat down for a certain amount of time and spoke about it with you, and then obviously shared it with the people watching the podcast. But taking that time to express myself and to actually be authentic, I feel like doing that here allows me to do that more throughout my day-to-day life.
Yeah, and I completely agree with you actually. Like, I think it was last Saturday, I was in a pub, and like me and this girl were talking, and we were talking about, I won't get into it, it's something along the lines of like, if a couple broke up, how long should someone wait till they get onto like dating apps, whatever. And usually I would kind of just like have an opinion, but wouldn't really be asked to like debate this person.
Yeah.
But that day I was just like completely willing to like talk it through with them and be like, well, this is what I believe.
Yeah.
And it's made me, like you say, it's made me more authentic, even without realising.
Yeah.
And like this whole podcast, it is just about talking through these ideas, navigating what we think is right about an idea and what's wrong, and developing them into something more concrete, even though in the future like these ideas can completely change.
Still, it's good to articulate them though, and
it's difficult at times to articulate them. Do you ever like when you're talking and then you like after like 2 minutes of straight talking, like, what the fuck did I even just say?
You don't know. You're like, where was I going with that?
You could have said it in like 30 seconds, but you take like 2 minutes. You're like,
but yeah, sometimes you need to, when you're exploring the ideas, you need to beat around the bush a little bit to kind of find what you're looking for.
Yeah. So bring the chaff with the wheat.
Yeah. That's one way of putting it.
Yeah. I always say that. But yeah, I don't know, going back to the creative person, like the original question that was ages ago now, how do you think you can integrate being creative using the shadow? Is that so? How can you? What methods can you take to become more creative when you integrate the shadow? Is that what you kind of?
Like we were talking about how for a child who's been told they're drawing his shit by their parents, who was resentful because they were not well behaved earlier. Like for that person, they may grow up and not be in touch with their creative side because they were told it was shit when they were little. So that's become a repressed part of themselves, part of the shadow. What steps do you think people can take to integrate that kind of?
I think maybe like creativity is definitely like a subjective thing, and creative works are going to be viewed as some people as like the best thing they've ever seen, and other people they'll view exactly the same work as something that's just mediocre or a bit shit. And I think like one way to kind of become more creative as a person is to stop putting value on the judgment that other people might have on that creativity. Like when you're a kid, it's very hard to do that because you want your parents to enjoy and like the things that you do and create. And as you get older, that's the same sort of thing. You want the public and the general like external world to appreciate the work you've done, but if it's true creativity, you're doing it just because you're passionate about creating this thing in the certain way that you would create it. So you don't necessarily need to put value on how other people will judge it. That's a very difficult thing to do though, because like we are just very judgmental beings, like by nature. So I guess maybe just trying not to put value on how other people would think and judge your work.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's a practical way to do that though.
Yeah, but I think that's difficult because like when you're creating a piece of artwork, like if it's good, it will resonate with some people, maybe not everyone, but I don't think it's necessarily a good thing to be in kind of this echo chamber of just creating things yourself but never getting any feedback, particularly when you're learning. But I guess you just need to I think for people it's more just taking action, maybe to pursue, like if they're interested in something, to pursue it, or if they're interested in trying some sort of creative thing, they should do it if they have that urge inside of them. It's kind of we spoke about the hero's journey, how how's the call to adventure? Like that's call to adventure is probably often going to come from the shadow, from some sort of repressed desire, and for someone that call to adventure might be to start doing something creative, and yeah, I guess it just comes being to having the awareness to realize that, and then having the courage to pursue it. And maybe that's a theme with this whole integrating the shadow. It takes courage to do it, because
why do you think it does take courage? Like, I definitely agree it is very courageous to integrate the shadow. Do you think it takes courage because people are scared of the reaction they'll get from society and their peers, or do you think there's something else that kind of is more like something more personal about it? Do you think it might take courage to, that way, if you're integrating your shadow, you're almost saying, I'm not really living the life as the person I truly am?
Yeah.
And do you think it's quite courageous to say to yourself and act out, I don't know how you word it, but like, I'm not who I say I am.
Yeah.
And it's kind of, it's fearful, and like, to think that you aren't who you think you are. I guess I don't know why it is fearful though.
Yeah. So to your question, I think that is some part of it which you're scared to integrate your shadow because of you don't want to appear a certain way to other people, because realistically that's kind of the fundamental reason why the shadow becomes, because it's the opposite of the persona, the person you present to the world. You want to present this certain person, so you're hiding these things away. So it's going to take courage to be willing to show these things.
Yeah. So do you think it takes courage to kind of think to yourself, I'm not living my life the way I think I should, and my life is almost a facade? Do you think it takes do you think that's quite fearful for most people?
Yeah. Well, sorry, I think it takes courage as well, because the things that you'll find inside the shadow are things that you don't want to come across yourself.
Right.
So you will realise parts about you. Like, if you become aware of it, you're like, fucking hell, I've got like maybe a lot of sexual fantasies that I wish I didn't have. Or you've got a lot of aggression built up that you're like, this is like not good. Or there's other traits that you consider evil.
Yeah.
And it could be maybe traumatic to come across those type of things. So I think that's why that's another reason it takes courage, because you're probably gonna get some answers to questions about yourself that you don't want to hear.
Yeah. Do you think it's also when you discover and like investigate your shadow, you realise you have the capability for these certain actions that you view as negative, and like you view them as like terrible almost, like realising you have the capability to be like violent or like ultra aggressive, or you have these strange sexual fantasies or whatever, like that's scary because it goes so much against your worldview maybe. But I guess integrating the shadows and being a higher man go hand in hand, because it's not about the worldview, it's about your individual view. And setting your own values.
It's about becoming authentic, because it kind of brings us on to the consequences of not integrating the shadow. So there's an illusion that you're safe if you ignore the shadow, because you don't have to confront these dangerous parts of yourself. But the reality is you're not safe, because the shadow is still there whether you choose to admit it or not. But if you don't become aware of it, and if you don't integrate it, then it will make itself known unconsciously, and you won't get to choose, and it'll probably come out in a bad way. So this is probably how maybe a lot of like domestic violence or something happens, because people have this darker side to themselves. Perhaps they're resentful about things nothing to do with their partner. They're resentful about their life in a certain way, and they choose not to address it. They choose not to address it, and one day their partner says something wrong to them, which wouldn't even be that bad.
Yeah.
But then then they just snap, and they're like, where did that come from? Like, they became possessed by the shadow because they had so much aggression built up inside of them. So that's one of the big consequences if you choose to remain willfully blind about the shadow. That in some sense you don't get a choice about whether it makes itself known. You get a choice about whether it's voluntary, and you have control over it. You're not safe from it if you choose to ignore it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of like, but like, okay, in that example, do you think, like, this person not living the life they want to, and they build this resentment, and their partner says something, and they flip at the partner? Do you think that when they flip at the partner, do you think that is because they attach that resentment to the partner, or do you think do you think they can still flip at the partner even if their resentment is attached to something completely different? Like, the person might think, oh, I've not got the job I want because I got married and it held me back in this location where I want to move to this other area to get a better job.
Yeah.
Or do you think, like, separate from the partner, they're just resentful about not having a job and then they still flip at the partner? Or do you think
I don't think there has to be a connection.
Right.
I think that aggression could come out in different ways. Like, they could just be fuming at something their boss did, and then, I mean, it's an extreme example for domestic violence, but they might go home and they might be a bit of a cunt to their partner.
Yeah.
Like, just rude to them and mean to them, because they've got this resentment inside them and they project that onto other people. So yeah, that's that word, like, projecting it onto other people. I think that's commonly what happens when you don't integrate your shadow. You project it onto others.
Do you think it's usually projected onto those closest to you?
Yeah.
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 Yeah, do you think that's maybe why, like, a lot of people in relationships, like, if there's a really nice person, they usually treat their girlfriend the worst out of all their mates and, like, the people they interact with. Not all the time.
Yeah, it's maybe a common thing.
How do I say it? Like, do you know when someone, like, let's say someone's going through a really shitty time and they'll always burst out as the person closest to them.
Yeah.
Even if it has nothing to do with them, like you were saying.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is? Is that because maybe they trust that person more to be able to forgive them, or?
Yeah, maybe.
Or they're just more comfortable with them, and then that part of the shadow comes out faster.
Yeah, I think it's probably because they're more comfortable. Because, for example, the reason they're suppressing, let's say, their aggression in the first place, is because in the context that they're becoming angry, like if their boss is a dick to them in this example, like, they build up the anger, but then they're trying to be socially conformist, so they're holding it in, and then when they go home, there's not that pressure to socially conform. And when you're comfortable with someone, I guess you can be more authentic. You will be more authentic. Like, you are being authentic when you let the shadow possess you, but it's part of you that you don't want to let take control of you. So even though it's authentic, in that case, it's not integrated, it's not controlled, so it's going to come out in a negative way.
Yeah. Yeah, I hear that. There's a guy I know at uni who, he's, when researching this topic, like, he's the perfect example of someone that's not integrated his shadow, to me anyway. Like, he's such a lovely guy, and, like, everyone will say he's just, like, a genuinely sound guy when he's sober, but, like, when he drinks, he's been going out with his girlfriend for 2 years since the start of uni, but when he drinks, like, he, on a regular basis, he just turns into an absolute, like, dickhead. Like, he treats his girlfriend like shit, and, like, he treats, like, his mates like shit, and just kind of goes off on one at people, and, like, it always seemed weird to me, like, he's so nice and so lovely. It's so opposite that he is such a dick when he's drunk.
That's the shadow, man. Yeah. Like, I can't remember. I think Carl Jung said it's. I can't remember the different things he listed, but one of the things he said that can cause you to manifest your shadow is if you've drunk alcohol, or you've done other things which loosen your inhibitions. Like, that's when the shadow is more free to come out and take possession of you. I guess you're in a less conscious state, and it'd be, maybe that's the reason, like, these negative fantasies often come up in dreams, because you're, like, physically unconscious in your dreams.
Okay.
So that's another way they make themselves known, and that's another way people can become aware of their shadow, because if they learn to, like, remember their dreams and they're aware of their dreams, things will come up which maybe they should think about.
Yeah, investigate it consciously.
Yeah.
Interesting. So, right, this might sound weird. Do you know how, like, on certain substances, some people tend to, like, have different egos? Like, do you know how, like, for some people, vodka is sound for them, and then, like, if they drink tequila, they go crazy, and if they drink gin, they get really sad.
Yeah.
And, like, with, like, other drugs that are, like, illegal, which you shouldn't do, like, someone who's on, like, coke might just be an absolute dickhead, where someone else who does it might be really nice and friendly.
Yeah.
Do you think maybe the reason that someone acts like a twat when they're on these different substances is because they don't have an integrated shadow?
Yeah, definitely. That's the shadow making itself known involuntarily.
Yeah, so someone that maybe, if you see someone that's just, like, lovely and, like, sound when they're on these different drugs or, like, different drinks, they have, like, a largely integrated shadow.
Yeah, I'd say, I mean, maybe not. Maybe it's not black and white, yes or no. Just because you're fine to be around when you're drunk doesn't mean you've necessarily integrated your shadow. But that is it. I think that is an indicator that they are more authentic. If when they're drunk, they're still kind of the same person as they are when they're sober.
Yeah.
Because their whole personality is authentic and properly aligned.
It shines through.
Yeah, even when they are, if they are a bit drunk, inhibitions will be loosened, and they'll probably, like, if you're drunk, you take more risks and don't care as much about the consequences. That's just, like, a fact of being drunk.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, certainly for people who don't have their shadow integrated, there'll be a far more extreme change in their personality when they get drunk and their inhibitions are loosened enough for their shadow to come out.
Yeah. Yeah, I hear that. That's interesting to think about. Yeah. Any other what about the dangers of integrating your shadow?
So have a look at my bullet points.
Yeah.
Do you want to
Oh, yeah.
The dangers of confronting your shadow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't really put anything about that, but have you got any ideas, the dangers of confronting your shadow?
I mean, I didn't write anything down, but we sort of discussed it earlier, like, there's a fine line between being disciplined and taking action based on goals that you've set, and sort of, like, giving in to desires.
Yeah.
And realising your true emotions and acting on them.
Yeah.
Like, there's a tension between that. But I don't know if there's a danger as such.
Yeah, maybe that's not necessarily a danger of integrating your shadow. That's that'd be a danger of that's something you might come across if you get too obsessed with this idea that everything, any sort of internal desire you have is your shadow.
Yeah. I'd say maybe one danger I could think of is if there's, like, an individual who has just suppressed so much of their emotions in the pursuit of pleasing others their whole life, when they do finally integrate their shadow and, like, become who they truly think they should be, like, they're just going to be such a different person. I think it's an extreme example, and very much like a very small proportion of people, but they could become such a different person, like that. All the individuals that knew them might not even know who the new person is at all.
Yeah.
Obviously not at all. I think, like, some personality traits will always cross over between your old self and then your self-actualized self.
Yeah.
But it might be strange to, like, enter the world born again almost.
Yeah, but I'd say in that context, you might worry about the risk of losing all your friends, but you need to worry about the risk of living an inauthentic life.
Mm-hmm.
And never having really any real connections because you're not your authentic self. Perhaps that's the bigger risk.
Right, yeah.
In that circumstance. There's a quote, I'm not sure who it's by, maybe you do, it's Nietzsche or one of these dudes, but it's like you stare into the abyss long enough and the abyss will stare into you.
Oh, yeah.
Something like that. And maybe that's true with the shadow, maybe...
What does that mean, though?
Well, I've heard Jordan Peterson talk about it, and the point. I think I'm losing my voice a bit. I need to end this scene, but yeah, I've heard Jordan Peterson talk about it, and I think the point he makes about it is. Well, he actually kind of. I think it is a Nietzsche quote, and he pushes back on it somewhat, or he adds something onto it. Where it's you gaze into the abyss for long enough, and the abyss gazes into you. But if you gaze into the abyss even beyond that, then there's this new point you can find where you're able to kind of confront and overcome it. So I think, I don't really know what it means too much, like too in detail, but it's just, we talk about the dangers of confronting the shadow. You are kind of looking into the darkness of your own soul, and perhaps, I guess there's a danger that it crushes you, but again, I think maybe you should be more concerned about the risk of not doing it than of doing it.
Yeah. I don't know how much this quote from Peterson kind of crosses over into this this specific conversation, but there's that great quote about the devouring mother, that concept from Nietzsche, from Freud, and Peterson says that mothers need to let their children go out and explore the world, because although they might lose their life in the world, would you rather
you might lose your body out there, but if you stay here, then you lose your soul.
You lose your soul, yeah. And I don't know, I feel like it crosses over into this somehow, but I can't really connect it explicitly. But it's just such a good quote to me, because instead of being scared and being afraid about what the world could do to you, you almost integrate your shadow and pursue what you think is right, and do that in an aggressive and dominant way, and you risk your life at that, but you maintain such a meaningful experience, and you maintain your soul almost.
Yeah. At the end of Fight Club, the narrator shoots himself in the face, and then no spoiler on that one, sorry guys. The narrator shoots he shoots himself in the face, and then basically Tyler Durden disappears, and I think the symbolism of that is that the old self will try and resist the change, which in this case would be the integration of the shadow. But it's only once you accept that your transformation will lead to the destruction of your old self, which will try and survive itself. It will lead to the destruction of your old self, and it could lead to your destruction altogether. It's only once you accept that the transformation might destroy you, that you're able to fully transform and let your old self die.
Yeah.
Difficult
to navigate. I guess it probably links back into Nietzsche's idea of creative destruction. In order to have creation, that something needs to be destroyed.
Yeah.
True creation, there needs to be something that is destroyed, and I'm just trying to think, is there an example where that might not necessarily be true?
Yeah, I feel like it's getting quite abstract with this type of idea.
Yeah.
So it's hard to kind of put practical examples onto it. But
even practically,
food for thought,
to make something, you do need to destroy the way that something is formed. To make a fucking building, you need to just cut down trees and dig out the earth and create concrete or whatever. Destroy something to create something.
Yeah.
I guess maybe when you hear the word destruction, you think something is lost.
Yeah.
But in terms of creative destruction, like you're saying, that thing is only transformed, not just lost. So the wood isn't cut down and destroyed, it's cut down and transformed into planks, so it can be made into a building.
Yeah.
And maybe there's something someone that's a bit more smart than us that can talk about how that is done on a personal level, in the deep psyche.
Yeah, well, it makes me think of the hero's journey episodes where basically the goal of the hero's journey is you start out in order, but in some way the order is unsatisfactory, and then you need to descend into chaos, and that if everything goes well, then the proper end place is a higher order, which was better than the previous one.
Yeah.
But I guess the message to people would be, it's kind of just about being able to embrace change and not being afraid to sacrifice what you currently have for
a better future.
For a better future, and in the context of the shadow, that would mean not being afraid to sacrifice old friends, for example, if it means transforming into your authentic self.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I always see that on like Twitter and stuff. Like, stop hanging around with people that don't like input anything there. Like, don't what's the word? Just stop hanging around with people that bring you down or don't like help you push forward in life. Like, so many people have mates where all they do is just go out and get fucked on the weekend.
Yeah.
Go to work 9 to 5 and then go out and get fucked on the weekend. They're not really like. And that's fine for, I think, a limited amount of time. And that limited amount of time could be like 5 to 10 years, as long as like you're still building towards something.
Yeah.
But being able to sacrifice those, like, because that is weird though, because like, although I like talk about these people being friends and all they do is getting fucked, that's a very meaningful relationship for a lot of like lads and girls as well, I'm guessing. Like, even if you do just go out and get fucked with your mates every weekend, you still do develop a bond with them.
Yeah.
So it must be quite hard for people to go onto the journey of self-actualization and forget about that. Well, not forget about it, but like push aside.
Yeah.
That interaction.
Yeah, I'm not sure it's necessarily a case of like you need to cut off your friends, and I kind of said like, because we spoke about before. I think we mentioned a similar thing. So that was an example of one thing you might lose along the way. But it could also be your career, your stability, if what you're doing just isn't genuine to you. And you take, and it's a big risk taking a radical change in career path to do something more meaningful, and you might lose. There's all sorts you can
steady
lose.
income and
yeah,
but
but that would be worth it. And with the friends thing, it's not. I don't think it's necessarily a case of having to cut off your friends. But if you're not willing to risk losing your friends for the sake of becoming your authentic self, then maybe you'll never make the change.
Yeah.
So you might not lose them, but if you're not willing to lose them, then it's like, I don't know. I do quite like the idea of being willing to sacrifice everything for the sake of the highest possible good. It does seem like that's the extreme kind of archetypal element to it.
Yeah.
But I think, I don't know, I just like the idea of the highest achievement being achieved by the most sacrifice. It seems right to me, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a sacrifice in this context. That was a bit of a tangent.
Yeah.
But
do you think that's almost what Jesus embodies?
Like, I was just thinking that as I was saying that, that's kind of the story of the crucifix. Like the ultimate redemption for humanity comes from the ultimate personal sacrifice of being killed on the cross. So yeah.
What a Donny.
What a Donny, eh?
Yeah.
Happy birthday, mate. This probably is a Christmas episode, pretty much.
You should have some jumpers or something. Got some mulled wine.
Oh well.
Just eating Christmas dinner.
And I don't think that'd be great watching.
Well, to be fair, you might get some abstract viewers, but they could become lifetime listeners.
Yeah. But yeah, just back to that point, I think you need to be willing to lose what you've currently got to actualize yourself, to be authentic. You shouldn't continue being if you realize that your shadow's not integrated, or that you're being inauthentic, and you're worried about losing friends, for example.
Yeah.
that you should still aim to be authentic, because ultimately you might lose some friends, but you descend into the chaos. That's what we were saying with the hero's journey. You're in this ordered place, but it's not quite right, and then you descend into the chaos, and then you arise as your authentic self. And then, in theory, once you've done that, you should have better, more meaningful connections with people.
Yeah, I agree. Do you think this is something that, I think you said earlier, like, as the earlier you start to try and integrate your shadow, the better. Do you think maybe the earlier you start to integrate your shadow in your life, the easier it is? Like, the longer you live without integrating your shadow, the darker and denser it becomes, as Jung would say.
Yeah.
So that makes it maybe more difficult to become self-actualised and fully absorb who you really are.
Yeah, I think that is the case. It's, people do maybe get stuck in their ways more when they get older, and people are more open to change when they're younger. But so yeah, I guess it's best just to do it as soon as possible, because, you know, if you realise there's a problem, like, why wait to fix it? Yeah. But that's not to say people who are later on in life, if they realise they've been living inauthentically, you know, it doesn't make a difference, that they should still try and make the change. Yeah. But
it's never too late to start. Just the earlier, the better.
Yeah, I would say so. Like, if you realise you're not living in a way aligned with
you say maybe
yourself.
It's difficult though when you're quite young, because how do you know how you want to align yourself?
Yeah.
Like what like, you get informed as life goes on, because you become more experienced in the way life works as you reach adulthood and stuff. Like, I think maybe it's a parent's job to help a child channel their aggression and, like, not channel their sexual desires, but, like, teaching them, like, some discipline and, like, some boundaries.
Yeah.
It's a parent's job to help them channel that aggression in positive ways.
Yeah.
And then as the child reaches, like, 16 to early adulthood, maybe that's when they just try to explore. Maybe not even necessarily try to explore their own shadow, but explore different ideas about how one would want it to live their life.
Yeah.
And then after they've kind of got a concrete idea of that, they can integrate their shadow based on what principles they want to live their life by.
Yeah. I guess when you're younger, so we spoke about being able to, when you're resentful, for example, being able to do some introspection about that and realise, oh, there's a genuine problem that I need to address, or I'm being childish and I need to just grow up and stop worrying about this. And when you're younger, for one, it's more difficult to have, like, I think you do just have less self-awareness, so you might not even realise that you're resentful. And I think your judgment is also worse in that your resentment is less likely to be justified. It's more likely you're being childish because you're younger.
Childish.
Yeah, but because you're younger and your judgment isn't as good, you know, it might be, you know, you might end up feeling resentful a lot of the time, and most time it's not justified, but perhaps at times you can rationalise why it is justified. But then it comes back to, okay, you do take action and it backfires, and you're like, oh shit, like, I realise I was wrong now. Whereas if you don't take action, then you never know. Right. But at the same time, potentially when you're young, there is a certain point of, like, maybe there is some role in becoming more disciplined, like focusing on just becoming disciplined, because realistically you don't know enough about the world to have the proper judgment about if it's right or wrong, your resentment. Maybe you should just suck it up and have some discipline for a while. Yeah, it links
back to what we were saying about, like, social justice. Who are you to think you know how the world works, and then who are you to think that you know how to fix it? Yeah. So maybe, like you're saying, just shut up and kind of crack on with what you know you need to do.
Yeah. So I guess that does mean that perhaps when you're younger, you should focus more on being disciplined rather than integrating the shadow, when those two things do conflict.
Yeah, I think when you're young, you kind of want to focus on learning as much as you possibly can, and then learning how to socialise yourself, like being integrated in society. Although maybe not necessarily something that everybody wants, I think it is like a necessity, because just down to probabilities, there's a pretty high fucking chance that you're going to have to become part of society, so you might want to learn how to live and navigate that world in a way that serves you and the community around you. And then after that, look for self-actualization. Or maybe they probably can go hand in hand if you've got quite a mature person.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it will depend on what context it's in. So, for example, perhaps you're thinking, I don't want to be on this career path, or I don't like a kid at school. They're like, I don't want to work hard at school. I don't care about anything at school, because that doesn't necessarily align with them internally. In that case, like, I think most reasonable people would say, yeah, they should just discipline themselves and do good in school anyway, even if they don't necessarily think it aligns with them, because they need to develop that discipline. And perhaps that can be said as time goes on as well. Like, maybe you should get into a career. You should try and be disciplined and do well in your studies, even if you question whether it's the right thing to do or not, rather than just like kind of what else are you going to do. Like, maybe you do have an idea of what else you'd do, but in that case, maybe it would be best to kind of ignore the resentment and just, grow up and just be more disciplined. And then maybe in different contexts, it's even more so, like, if you want to, we spoke about the social justice type things, like if you've never worked a job, never supported a family, never really been a self-supporting individual, and you want to go out and criticise maybe the way other people live, or the political system as a whole, like, you probably don't really have the understanding to do that, so you need to do certain things to discipline yourself and gain an understanding of the world before that comes. But then, like we spoke about, like, one of the other things is aggression, for example. Like, I feel like that's something someone can integrate however young they are. Like, if they're resentful towards someone, they should learn to stand up to them. Yeah. Like, it doesn't really matter what age. That could work for people in like primary school or whatever. If they could learn to stand up for themselves, that would be a good thing. Maybe the same thing with sexual desire. If people having these sexual fantasies but kind of suppressing it, then it'd probably be good for them to build up the courage to ask out a girl, for example. Like, that would be a form of integrating it, and maybe that would occur a little bit older, but at the same time, I don't think there's necessarily, like, in those two cases, it's not really a conflict between discipline and listening to your emotions, because if anything, it takes more discipline and more courage to express your emotions in those cases. Yeah. But I guess it's more important to be cautious about it in a case where your resentment might just come from the fact that you're doing something difficult and you're looking for a way out.
Yeah, you just make a little bitch about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting how it would take almost more discipline to realise your emotions and act in accordance with them.
Yeah. It'd be more difficult to do it, whereas, for example, someone at school who doesn't want to do the schoolwork and they're resentful about having to even do it, like, the schoolwork is a difficult thing. So in that case, it's more likely that they're using it as an excuse and they should just discipline themselves.
Right, yeah.
Jordan Peterson gives some advice about that if you want to give up doing something difficult on some sort of pursuit, maybe you don't realise it's right. Your rationalisation is you don't think it's right for you anymore. He says, okay, you're allowed to do that, but only if you take up something more difficult. You'd start a different pursuit, which is actually more difficult. Right. Because that kind of takes out the factor of stopping doing it because it's difficult, because you have to do something more difficult. But yeah, so it seems to work better. Yeah. I think that's the advice he would give to his patients and when he was doing clinical psychology.
That's quite good advice, because it really makes you think about the meaning that this task can give your life. Because like, sometimes I'm at uni, I'm just like, could just get like a normal job and just get some money and then just see how life goes and where it takes me.
Yeah.
But that's just the easier route in that moment.
Yeah. Yeah, like a lot of the things I've been speaking about, like with schoolwork or whatever, is things I feel personally with uni work. Sometimes I'm like, oh, I don't even fucking really know if I want this to be my career path. So that acts as a rationalisation to not do it, when I don't think that's a good rationalisation, because realistically you're just trying to avoid difficulty, and in that situation more discipline would be needed. Whereas in other situations, like we spoke about with maybe standing up for yourself, like that's a situation where the more difficult decision is to stand up for yourself. So in that case, it's not a case of you're not disciplined. Perhaps you could say you're being childish, but that's something you need to think about. But I guess this just acts as another tool to think, when you're introspecting about whether you're resentful for a reasonable reason or not. You can think, it's another thing you have to think about, like, okay, I don't want to be doing this. Is there something just as difficult that I would be willing to do? And then if you can't think of one, then you've maybe got to think, well, maybe I am just being undisciplined and you need to suck it up.
Yeah. Yeah, do you think, like, when, in the example of, like, you're at your uni course and you think to yourself, oh, maybe I don't even want to be doing this degree and go into this field. I don't know how I'm about to say it, but it seems like when you have that view, you have the view that, like, the world revolves around you in a sense, because you kind of forget that other people are doing other degrees and probably have the same exact feeling, and, like, the reason you're saying, like, the reason you should do that degree is because it gives you discipline, because you act out something that you don't want to do on a regular basis.
Yeah.
And that, like, provides you with, like, a internal drive to actually get shit done, which you can use in that career field, but you can use it in other aspects of different careers.
Yeah.
And it kind of, like, when you think, like, to yourself, oh, do I really want to be doing this business degree and, like, go into, like, an office job? It's, like, to me, it's like, obviously it's a selfish idea because you're talking about yourself, but it's almost maybe too selfish at times, because, like, you forget that other people have exactly the same situation in completely different courses. I don't know what point I'm trying to make there, but yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, but yeah, that's something, I do find myself, like, I'd say the past couple of days, like, I haven't done as much uni work as I had planned to, that I wanted to, and then in those moments, like, I was sitting on my phone scrolling through YouTube, like, that isn't a productive thing to do. But then in my head, I would kind of rationalise it, thinking, oh, I'm not doing the uni work because, I don't find the work meaningful, and I don't want to waste my life doing this work that I don't like, when it's like, I was scrolling through my phone fucking any more meaningful. It's just easier. So yeah, I think that's something I'm trying to develop more, being able to be more disciplined, which is why, it's good to have this kind of conversation about how much you should listen to those kind of inner feelings of maybe discontent in different situations. And yeah, I think considering the difficulty of things it's an important way to assess whether your resentment is valid or not.
Yeah, it seems almost like one thing that you could argue is always taking not always maybe, but taking the difficult path seems to provide your life with better outcomes. Like, the difficult path in terms of integrating the shadow is standing up for yourself, which is annoying because it takes courage, but that serves you in a way where people end up treating you better over the course of time.
Yeah.
And then the other side of that could be taking the difficult path is sitting down and being disciplined, which is annoying because the easy example is just watching a movie or playing video games, but that serves you over time because you work towards a goal like a degree and get a good outcome because you get a good degree.
Yeah.
Is the easy path ever the right path?
Yeah, I don't know. I've been thinking about this recently, and in my making myself an existential crisis in order to avoid doing uni work, I was thinking, like, okay, I'm doing this difficult thing of sitting down and doing the uni work. Like, is this actually going to make me happy or fulfilled? Am I just going to find myself in a number of years' time sitting down to do work in the same position when really it's not fulfilling me? But I guess you never know. And I think, I was probably just erring on the side. Like, I was in a probably a bit of a low dopamine state for whatever reason. And
bit of a crash.
Bit of a crash for whatever reason. And yeah, I just had to have a bit more discipline. That's probably what I should have done.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, I don't think the easy path ever is the right path. There's probably some examples that are maybe abstract or I just can't think of right now, but the difficult path is always the right one, it seems.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of difficult things you can do which aren't that good. Like, you could, I don't know.
Trying to set a world record for like how many hula hoops you can fit in your mouth. So I mean, like, it's just difficult, but stupid.
It's just, there's just no need to do it. But maybe that is just an important thing to think about in your decision making in general. Like, you need to be aware that you can often find yourself rationalising a certain decision, but thinking about, okay, is this actually just an easier decision that I'm making? And if that's the case, then you really need to consider whether you're just being lazy rather than it actually being a valid claim that you're rationalising it with.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'll try and do that to myself next time I don't feel like doing work.
Oh, yeah.
It's probably the right thing to do.
I think you're right. Well, I know you're right, I just don't want to admit it.
Yeah. But yeah, I guess there is some needs, like, when you get those feelings, like, the introspection is still important, because you might think, like, there may be a case where you're working too hard and you're not
burning out eventually.
Yeah, and it's not sustainable, or it's not really a good way of living your life. Like, you're not prioritising the right things. But realistically, in that moment, it's still the right decision to make the work, to do the work, I think, most of the time. Well, particularly in my case. Just thinking about it for myself. But yeah, it's maybe important to examine those thoughts sometimes. And then sometimes, like everything in life, it's not black and white. So you just need to make a judgment call. But I think a lot of these type of situations, it's best to err on the side of discipline.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's a difficult path.
Yeah.
But you don't want to fall into the comfort crisis, do you?
No.
Any other last remarks, maybe?
No, I'm not sure. Let's just have a look at the notes, and if there's anything we haven't mentioned yet, then...
I don't know if we've explicitly said, like, how would you integrate the shadow? I know, like, one of the main methods is just absolute truth and being, like, completely, not maybe reasonable, but, like, being completely truthful with yourself. Helps you identify different aspects of your personality that maybe you didn't want to investigate and all these other things. But anything else that you can think of? Or?
Yeah, but I feel like we have spoke about that quite a lot. It's the process of being aware of your reactions to things.
Yeah.
And if you become resentful about it, then you need to have a look at those feelings and think, is my resentment a projection of my own dissatisfaction?
Yeah.
Of my own experience? And then either acting on that or being able to decide, you know what, I'm just being childish.
Yeah, I hear that. Oh yeah, one thing I don't think we did discuss is why not embracing this shadow can be dangerous is without proper recognition of the shadow, it seems like you don't recognise that other people have their shadow, and you don't recognise that other people have this capability yourself for danger.
Yeah.
And that can kind of, for an individual who's very innocent.
Yeah.
Jordan Peterson says, like, when they experience a person who's kind of almost tyrannical and malevolent, they get inflicted this pain which is kind of out of proportion to what it should be.
Yeah.
And like Peterson says that, like, I think it's something along the lines of trauma occurs in a proportion to how much of your belief it demolishes.
Well, there's about what you were saying just then. Yeah, I think it is. I think that's another way of realising the shadow actually is to look at the negative things that have happened in the past, like you could learn about Nazi Germany and the terrible things that people did.
Yeah.
And you realise the shadow, and you can kind of realise the shadow by being able to see the evil of everyone in history within yourself.
Yeah.
Like you consider how you could be driven to such evil and that you have that evil inside of you.
The capability for that destruction.
Yeah.
Malevolence is in everybody. Is it, what's that book? Is it Ordinary Men?
Ordinary Men,
yeah. Yeah, because it seems, I don't know, not seen it stated anywhere, but it seems like Carl Jung was definitely like, well, I've seen him, I think he might have been influenced by the Nazis, but I'm guessing that sort of concept definitely is what influenced maybe his idea and belief on the shadow.
Yeah, well, there's the personal shadow. I think it's the personal shadow, which we spoke about a lot, but there's also the collective shadow, which I guess would be it is associated with the collective unconscious. I think you mentioned at the start.
Yeah.
Or maybe it was before the episode. I can't remember.
No, I think
it's at the start.
Yeah. But I've not looked into the collective unconscious.
Like the collective unconscious would be the things which are kind of, I guess ingrained into us, but on a cultural level.
Right. Right. Like murder's wrong and all this stuff.
Yeah. So the collective shadow would be, so the collective thing would be, the moral collective would be murder's wrong, but then that would build the shadow of like aggressive thoughts of murder being suppressed. Right. And then we can see the collective shadow play out on a larger scale in somewhere like Nazi Germany, where like there were many people committing big crimes. It was a big like collective operation to do all these atrocities. And yeah, I think that's another way of realising the shadow, realising the evils of other people and then being able to see them in yourself, which is another quite shocking and difficult thing to do. And in a sense, even that requires some courage.
Yeah.
But yeah, it'll be worth it.
Do you think like that, taking that viewpoint on humanity, initially it can be very like overwhelming, because you kind of like come to this realisation that humanity is so dangerous at times and so like evil, like it can kind of overwhelm you. You're a little bit like, whoa, I thought we were kind of all good people. Like at the end, I thought we were all good people. Like everyone has like a good heart deep down, but embracing that shadow makes you realise that we all. It's just the classic yin yang. Like there's good and bad, and that's a good thing overall, I think.
Yeah, but yeah, I guess it's better to realise it voluntarily than it is for it to happen to you.
Yeah,
because if you don't, then you're at a big risk. And yeah, it kind of comes back to a quote by Alexander Solzhenitsyn, which I'll paraphrase to like the line between good and evil doesn't run between political barriers or countries or religions. The line between good and evil runs down the heart of every individual.
Yeah.
Something to that effect.
Yeah.
So that kind of makes the point that everyone's got this good in them and everyone's got the evil in them, and it's kind of our own. You know, we can take responsibility for realising that, and then if we're aware of it, then we can have control over it. But if we're not, then we're at the will of our own internal desires as well as like the social pressures.
That's interesting. Yeah, I definitely want to have a little dive into the collective unconscious on Jung's part.
Yeah.
Pretty mad guy, to be fair, when you think about it.
Yeah, we could go into some of his other ideas in another episode, to be fair, because we just focus on the shadow this time. But I'm sure there's some other valuable stuff in there.
Yeah. Anything else that you sort of want to talk about or anything?
No, I think that's good. That's a good episode.
I think we've covered most of it.
Yeah.
Closing thoughts. I think maybe the road to integrating a shadow is most likely a long one.
Yeah. It's not like a singular event.
No. But as Jordan Peterson advocates, set yourself a target that is just about achievable. And like, if you don't think you can do this big thing, like splinter a goal you have into smaller goals,
Mm-hmm.
and just work towards self-actualizations. Work towards integrating shadow in a positive way, even if it is taking really small steps.
Yeah.
And I think that's something I'll try and do. Is just start something small, maybe do that same thing over and over again, so I know I'm doing it more naturally as time goes on.
Yeah.
And then move on to something else. But I think once you start the ball rolling with integrating shadow, it kind of just carries on itself, and like it will what's the word?
You get momentum with it.
Yeah, and it will kind of integrate itself into different aspects of your life.
You get into like a positive feedback loop with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the other and the important thing for integrating the shadow is just being aware and paying attention to how you feel, particularly in terms of resentment, but just paying attention to your emotional reactions to things. And if you have a negative emotional reaction to something, exploring the possibility that it might be a projection of your own discontentment due to something that you've repressed.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
Yeah. Oh, thank you very much, people. I don't know if I said the time earlier, but it is 6:52 p.m. It's been maybe one of the longest podcasts, maybe second longest or first longest.
How long has it been?
Just 2 hours 15 minutes ish.
2 hours 15. This will be the longest, I think.
Yeah, I think we got so longest
Good
podcast.
episode,
If
yeah.
you're still here to the end, fair fucks to
Nice
you.
in-person one. Plenty of content to make into clips with decent production value. Hopefully all these values, all these videos come through, and the audio's good. But yeah,
we'll find out. Cheers, guys. Thank you, Pete. See you next time.
See ya.